Drug abuse is an addictive activity, but can have such a grasp on the person engaged in it. At a time when people generally have poorer mental health and face the daily stresses of life, taking drugs can seem as a way out, a shield from the woes of their reality. However, we ask if there is another way that difficulties can be resolved. Why is it people find they need to take drugs, and what support should and can be given to them to help them beat this habit? We'd love to know your opinion on this topic and how it affects the Muslim community. The numbers should be on screen as well. So I'm going to start with you, Jessica. And we just had a little chat about, you know, the ratio between men and women in terms of how they're affected by drugs. And many of us have heard the devastating effects that drug abuse can actually have on people as well. But do you find that, you know, through the experience that you've had working at the Kolb Centre, that Muslim women are more affected, and how are the Muslim community affected as well?
Well, the first one about Muslim women, that's really difficult for me to answer with any clarity and honesty, because it's difficult to define with Muslim women. They don't come forward. It's quite a secret. There's a stigma with addiction anyway. Yeah. So therefore, when there's a stigma, it doesn't just affect the individual, it affects the family. So mums don't tend to, or Muslim women tend to come forward for any treatment for themselves.
That's true.
It's a very secretive
There is
community.
that sense of shame, isn't it, of going through something where you have to turn to maybe a substance and
misuse service.
Yes, definitely. There is that stigma as well, and of course, addiction to drugs doesn't discriminate in terms of age or race or social standing. But what are the causes for which people become addicts? What are the main reasons?
Mostly negative. We're talking childhood trauma here, we're talking teenage years, something appeared, emotional distress, possibly domestic violence in the home. It ranges from each individual that come into the services. It has there's negativity in the background.
Definitely.
Or trauma in the background somewhere that's masking over, like you touched upon, masking over the reasons why people are taking substances.
It is mostly negative. I mean, I know that some people do take drugs for leisure as well, and do you find those sort of people tend to come to...
If it's leisure, they tend not to access treatment. This is what we do at weekends, and this is acceptable, because we do this at weekends. It's a social drug. Social drug and party drugs are very hard to get the youngsters to acknowledge that you're going to have an issue with this long term. Alcohol, different subject, very, very different subject.
And alcohol generally is a lot more tends to affect Muslims, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would, in my opinion, what we've seen in our service, our counselling service, is alcohol, for the substance that's being misused. Yes. Okay.
Sister Liz, I mean, this is a very important subject to discuss this morning, but in terms of drug addiction, how can one get out of addiction? It is very difficult, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is. But I think, you know, the good news is that there is a lot of help out there. There's a lot of, you know, centres like the Kolb Centre that are offering, you know, lots of unique solutions to these addictions. And I think the thing we have to remember is that all of us are unique, all of us are individuals. There isn't a kind of one-size-fits-all solution. And it's not just because something works for one person, it's going to work for another person. So I think the first thing you have to do if you're seeking help for yourself or for, you know, somebody you know, a friend or family member, you need to really get advice about what is the best treatment for them. You know, it's not just... sometimes I think there's the... you know, I used to work in... the drug industry, the drug rehabilitation industry, and it was very much a case of, you know, oh, if you're addicted to drugs, then the solution is stop taking drugs, which is kind of ridiculous, isn't it?
And it must be patronising to a lot of people as well, once they're in the sort of state of taking drugs as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, now, you know, there's so many different kinds of things out there. One that I was particularly interested reading about was cognitive behavioural therapy, which is... huge success rate with that, and this is a kind of, you know, drug taking is a learned habit, isn't it? So this is about, you know, unlearning that habit and relearning another way to cope with whatever it was that got you into this situation in the first place. And that, I think, is really interesting, because that's really kind of going back to the sort of root cause, you know, of the problem, rather than just kind of skirting over the issue. There's also something else called the 12-step programme. Not every centre offers every programme, but there's something called the 12-step programme, which again is a much more holistic approach to sort of dealing with the issue. And it it deals with things like spirituality,
Yep.
you know, as well as the sort of day-to-day issues as well, and the counselling and things like that. There's home detox, but obviously with home detox you have to be very, very motivated. I think that's probably...
You do, and you have to want to change. I mean, to tackle addiction, you have to want that change.
Yeah.
And going back to the Muslim community, this is accepting.
Yeah.
It's accepting that my son or daughter or my wife or husband has an addiction to such and such. Once we get past the acceptance stage, we can work with the client.
Yeah.
But it is very much getting somebody to accept, oh, no, I drink every day, I drink 10 units every day, but I'm not an addict.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're well on your way.
Yeah,
definitely.
because there's this new term, isn't there now, functional addicts. So this is, you know, people that are actually consuming dangerous amounts of, you know, be it alcohol or so-called recreational drugs, but still have a job and kind of function.
For how long,
normally.
though?
For how long? That's the
the
issue,
problem.
isn't it?
Yeah.
We've actually got a caller on the line. We've got a sister from Yorkshire. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, sister. Assalamu alaikum, sister. You're live on Women's AM.
Wa alaikum salam.
Jazakumullah khairan for joining us this morning. What is your question for the panel?
I've got a sister who takes drugs, and we've all tried to be understanding and helpful, but until she's not ready to admit that she has a problem and see how much it affects her and her family, she's not getting any help. She's not asking for help. So how do you overcome that step? What do we do?
Jazakumullah khairan for that question. Inshallah, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make things easy for you. I'll just repeat the question for our guest, that basically there's a woman who has a sister, relative, who takes drugs, and her and her family, of course, have tried to be as understanding and motivating her as well to try and see a better way out. So what advice could you give to her, especially if she's not motivated to leave drugs? I'll direct that question to you.
Does she? Have they good? They've got a good relationship, obviously, because they're working together.
Yeah.
Who wants? It seems like the sister.
The
Is
relative,
this a sister?
the
relative.
Yeah.
Does the relative want this? It seems that she wants this more than the actual person that's taken the drug.
I think that's the case, yeah. That is the case. So she's not really interested. Obviously, her family want to help her, which is always the
And
case.
that's admirable.
So how can you encourage somebody like that to get off drugs if they don't have the will?
How's this having an effect on her life? I mean, does she have children? What's the picture here? What's going on? I know she's taking drugs, but what's going on for her? I would suggest, whilst they're doing it themselves, but it's very emotional between relatives and the person that's taking it. More so, the relative wants that possibly see GP. Would the
Because a lot of people do tend to have trust with their GP, isn't it, as opposed to
very trusted profession.
to drug outreach services, isn't it? And maybe that's what she should. Maybe she has a trust issue involved. We don't really know too much, but maybe
I think it's quite normal for a kind of a relative to maybe want it sometimes more than the addict, isn't it?
Of course, they can see the effects, can't they?
Exactly, and I think then it's kind of your role to kind of be there, let them know they're cared about, not be sort of confrontational, but just try and explain to them the effects that it's having on the rest of the family. Try and make them see it from your point of view, you know, so they can get an understanding of the gravity of the situation. Because sometimes, like you said, you know, we're like, oh, you know, I just drink, you know, my 10 units in the evening. I'm not harming anybody. I just take drugs at the weekend. But actually, these things do have a knock-on effect on your loved ones. And once you can see that, you know, of course, that's going to have an effect on you, and hopefully that will.
I mean, it is a huge step, because I think that makes up part of the work, is to try, of course, to motivate the person to accept that, and it's something that, of course, is really important.
But from a health point of view, a GP is very... I mean, there are unsung heroes, GPs, and everyone trusts our GP, but if we could get her along to the GP, being emotionally involved in this isn't necessarily going to work, and, you know, the threats, or not just threats, the loving, tokenistic gestures, but it's sometimes better to take yourself out of that. If the person doesn't want it, it's not going to work, in my experience.
I mean, in your experience, you find that, you know, with second-generation Muslims or just young people in general, do you think that they're more susceptible to accessing your services?
No, quite the contrary. Their second generation are easier to... I think there's been a change. First generation, there seems to be a more traditional way.
Right.
We're not going to acknowledge this. It's best if we don't. If we don't know about it, it's not there. But second generation, It's more preventative work we're doing with the second generation, and it seems to be working. There's trickles of Muslim communities coming into treatment services, which is excellent, which is a good start.
It is a good start.
But awareness for females, female Muslims, that's where we have to start. Programs like this.
Yeah,
I really believe that's where we have to start.
Definitely.
Because we do have more Muslim men in treatment than we do for Muslim women.
Yeah.
I mean, what if a parent, for example, a mother, suspects that that their child is taking a substance, and a lot of people, a lot of parents out there may definitely have come across this sort of situation. What kind of advice can we offer that woman or that parent?
I would suggest, because obviously I don't want to focus on any just one area here, but I would suggest the internet. I mean, most people do have internets at home. Research it for yourself.
Yeah.
You know, don't just assume that he's got these, he's displaying these characteristics, so he must be using this, this and this. You know, sit down and have an open discussion if you can.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is a mum with a son, slightly difficult, I would imagine.
Yeah.
If it's a mum and a daughter, even more difficult. But sit down and have the open conversation. If you know what the drug is, research it yourself and check what's in your borough. There may be some faith centres there.
Yeah, yeah.
There may not. You know, budget cuts and all, you know, we know that these centres are dwindling away fast. But
I think the thing is, the point is that, you know, they shouldn't feel that you're kind of dealing with it in isolation.
No.
You know, what I've
Absolutely.
noticed is that a lot of the organisations out there that offer help for addicts, they also have a lot of help out there for friends and family of addicts as well. So you can
Absolutely.
actually phone, you can get the counselling you need, you can get the support you need, because it's
Absolutely.
very emotionally draining for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, there is the help out there, and that, you know, you can access that, you know, as Jessica said, very easily.
There is
via
family
the
and
internet,
carers.
and
We
That's
do
really,
at the
really
CAB
important
Centre.
to
We do
give the
have.
support to the people who,
Yeah,
who definitely want
absolutely.
to help their loved ones out of it.
And you'll find there's more people in your situation than you think, and
Yeah.
you know, when you make those connections and you can support each other and help each other through these difficult times, then you know, that is going to be
It is
a
about
kind of
not
huge
being
building
afraid to
block.
ask for the help, whether that's
Yeah.
going to your friends or your family, or of course centres such as yourself as well. And that's really important.
Yeah,
as
there's
well. And
no
I think it might
shame
be
in
that
asking for
stigma,
help, yeah.
Definitely. I mean, we know as Muslims, of course, that we go through all sorts of different tests. So how does the Dean help us through this kind of test? You know,
Well, you know, the thing is, and I know we've said it, you know, again and again and again on this show, but you know, as a Muslim, we have to remain firm in our belief that Islam has the answers. All we have to do as a Muslim is find the answers and, you know, apply it in the right way. Which, of course, again, we've said before, is sometimes easier said than done.
Absolutely.
You know, but the first thing to do, you know, go back to the Quran. You know, what does Allah Subhanahu wa Taala tell us about what our experience in this dunya is going to be? He tells us it's going to be hard. We're going to be tested, but He gives us advice to help us deal with this. Many ayahs in the Quran pertain to this, but just one of them, seek Allah's help with patient perseverance and prayer. It is indeed hard, except for those who are humble. And that's from verse 2, ayah 45. So that's, you know, basically telling you, you know, be patient, find solace in your prayer, find solace in your salah.
it's about having a positive attitude, isn't it? And I think
That's it.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, again, you know, coming back to points that we've made again and again, we should find comfort in the fact that we're being tested, because this is Allah's promise to us, and this is, you know, this is exactly the way it's meant to be. So, you know, embrace these tests. Yes, they're difficult. Yes, they're going to be challenging. But, you know, Allah will never burden us with more than we can bear, and, you know, we can get through it. Remind yourself of why you're here. You know, this life is just a test. This life is just, you know, this life is just short. It doesn't matter if we make mistakes. It doesn't matter if we go wrong.
Absolutely.
As we've said before, there's no shame or harm in asking for help. There's no shame or harm in saying, you know, I've done something wrong. I don't know what to do next. You know,
because
people out there will help
people
you.
are looking for an escape route, and that's what perhaps what you could say this better.
Normally downwards.
They normally go a
It's
downward
not-
spiral, not an upward spiral, because it's a short-term route,
Fix,
isn't
yeah.
it? Short-term fix. So it's about looking for a long-term fix, being positive about
absolutely.
your situation, and accessing the help that you definitely need. What advice would
Absolutely.
you give, just to round up the show, to, I know we've discussed family and friends before, what would you give to family and friends as well? Because you talked about the effects that they definitely have in this regard. So what advice could you give to them?